commissioner talked about how ISD is enforcing the new short-term rental ordinance. And I know that at least that it's working at least in part so far, because I've seen buildings in the North End that were running like hotels. Now they're advertising annual leases, including the building right next to me that has 10 to 12 units. For the last few years, it's been run like a hotel. Now they're advertising for long-term leases. I don't know if any of us can afford the rent though. But what's happening also in the city is that especially corporations, but other building owners that want to continue to make money off of short-term leasing are turning to other mechanisms in the zoning code. For instance, executive suites. And we know of a few buildings in the city where the buildings have, in fact, over the last couple of months, been converted into executive suites to continue the short-term rental operations. Now, how can they convert to executive suites? Because the zoning code and zoning map allows executive suites as a use. When it's an allowed use, it means it's by right, and the owner can convert by simply applying for a permit to the city. There's no zoning board approval necessary. There's no coming to the community. As Lydia mentioned, changing it to a conditional use would require those applications to come before the community and also be reviewed and conditioned, potentially, by the zoning board. Much of Hanover Street, from Cross Street up to the Paul Revere Mall, parts of Richmond Street, North Street, all of Little Prince Street, fall within a district where executive suites is allowed. So any one of those buildings can be converted from long-term housing into executive suites simply by the owner applying for a permit. No coming to the community. You may recall that maybe 10 years ago, we saw 2 or 3 buildings behind Brico become boutique hotels. People had lived in there for many, many years. They became boutique hotels because boutique hotel wasn't allowed use in the zoning code within that same Hanover Street commercial zone. So I'm going to read a letter that supports, whereby we would be supporting a petition by the mayor's office and his neighborhood services department to change executive suites from an allowed use to a conditional use. And that would then apply specifically to the Hanover Street corridor that I mentioned earlier. Most of the rest of the North End is already either executive suites prohibited or executive suites conditional use.
Dave, before you read it, could you tell us what the corridor is again, Hanover to?
On Hanover Street, it's both sides of the street from Cross Street up to the Paul Revere Mall, according to the zoning map. And then at least the first block of Richmond Street, part of North Street in that same Richmond Street area, all of Little Prince Street from Hanover to Sacred Heart Church. And there may be a few other side streets, portions of side streets that are included. So you're talking about probably over 100 buildings easily, and then multiply that by the number of units in these buildings. Yes?
Is there a minimum how many apartments in each building, or could the whole building be an executive suite?
As far as I know, the whole building could be, just as much as those buildings that were long-term housing are now boutique hotels on a boutique hotel on Hanover Street. Yes.
Define executive suites for the purposes of zoning, if
Uh,
anyone knows.
Yeah, shoot, you know, I didn't bring the amendment to the zoning code, which includes the definition, or actually may change the definition. The amendment. Do you have the zoning code with you?
No, today I didn't bring it.
Wasn't
Sorry.
it like an extended rental? It's not a short-term rental, but an owner is able to rent it out for
the owner of the building can rent out, yeah, and I better not say anything, because I want to get the definition correct.
Section
Sorry,
2
I
and
don't
Section
know.
2A of the Boston zoning code.
Here we go. Executive suites, any dwelling other than a boarding house, dormitory, fraternity, lodging house, sorority house, hotel, motel, or apartment hotel, those are all other uses defined in zoning, in which living space with kitchen facilities is let to fewer than 10 persons who are not related by blood, marriage, adoption, or other analogous family union, primarily the temporary abode of persons living elsewhere. So it's a temporary abode. And they don't live there, it says right here, they live elsewhere. But it doesn't give, for instance, the number of days in here, the minimum number of days. I've heard that that 10 days was the limit. But then Ford, I wish Ford were here because he could recite all this right off the top of his head. Ford, I think, mentioned that it had been changed from 10 days, 10 nights to 1 night recently. But it's at least no more than 10 days. So an owner can rent out for just 10 days to these parties who live elsewhere. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read the letter really quickly. And I hope that all of you have a copy of it. And this was also sent to the members via email along with tonight's agenda. NEWRA is writing to express its support of the City of Boston Department of Neighborhood Development's petition to amend the text of the Boston zoning code to change the regulation of executive suites in certain neighborhoods, including the North End. This city-sponsored text amendment would change the use regulations in Article 8 and in various neighborhood district articles, including our article, to conditional use. So it would go from allowed use to conditional use, where executive suites is currently in allowed use. This change has become necessary due to the growing conversion of housing units to executive suites by short-term rental operators as a means of circumventing Boston's new short-term rental ordinance. The North End is a residential neighborhood of nearly 11,000 residents living in an area of only 1/3 square mile. As in so many other neighborhoods of Boston, housing in the North End is at a premium and becoming more and more out of reach for many. The North End lost hundreds of housing units to short-term rental conversions over the past several years. While our community is hopeful that the short-term rental ordinance will cause a return of many of these units to the long-term housing supply, we recognize that unconditional executive suite conversions could severely limit such a return. Many of our residents live in buildings within the Hanover Community Commercial Subdistrict, which encompasses much of Hanover Street as well as parts of Prince, Richmond, and North. Currently, the zoning code allows the hundreds of housing units in this sub-district to be converted to executive suites without any community notification, review, or input. Article 54, which is the North End article of the zoning code, states that among the goals and objectives of the North End neighborhood district zoning are, this is right in the zoning code, quote, to manage the future development of the North End for the benefit of the inhabitants of the North End and Boston. Quote, to preserve and enhance the North End neighborhood. Quote, to promote residential development that is affordable to all segments of the community, particularly low and moderate income residents. We ought to cite that more often. And quote, to discourage displacement of residents. These residential protections in the zoning code should be preserved and supported even as and especially as the city's economy grows and evolves, sometimes placing new risks on the quality of residential life. We believe that the proposed amendment is critical to the support of the Article 54 goals and objectives. Importantly, the amendment would not preclude executive suites as a use within the Hanover Community Commercial Subdistrict, but it simply would subject the use to community review and input. For these reasons, we urge the Commission to incorporate the amendment and its residential protections into the zoning code. Any other questions?
I have a few process questions, Dave. What is the approval process to get an amendment into the zoning bylaws? I mean, in a town, it's a town meeting vote, but
Yeah, no, it's the zoning commission in the city of Boston. That's separate from the zoning board. The zoning board just issues conditions and variances. But the zoning commission actually can change the zoning code. And the question that I've had, and Victor, and Victor's had the question is, who can petition the zoning commission to make amendments?
Anyone can.
Good. Well, then NEWRA should from time to time petition the zoning commission to amend, so we don't get more buildings like the one on Moon Street that was recently constructed.
and do you have any idea, again, thinking of, excuse me, impact on the process? How many neighborhoods of Boston will be affected by this proposed
There's
amendment?
a-
And is there any opposition that's been voiced to date?
In the amendment itself, it changes the zoning code for many many neighborhood districts, like the North End, where executive suites is currently allowed and allowed use. So there are many neighborhoods that are affected by this amendment. I believe positively affected by this amendment. And all I can tell you about the position of those neighborhoods is the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations, which represents most of the downtown neighborhoods, North End, West End, Beacon Hill, Fenway, Back Bay, South End, and then you go Chinatown is also represented. ADCO is supporting this amendment and trying to get the neighborhoods to support the amendment, and that's why this letter was drafted.